This is Future Sense Now, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. Future Sense Now is brought to you by the Futures Forum. Stay tuned for a journey to the future with host Dr. Claire Nelson.
Greetings and welcome to Future Sense Now, an online e-magazine of the Futures Forum. It is April 2018 and we're celebrating Earth Day with a very special exploration into the future of islands. I'm an island girl, what else? Smart Island 2030 and beyond. The United Nations notes that small islands have very different challenges. We hear a lot obviously about climate change and existential threats to many flat islands due to rising sea levels. In fact, since 1994, the United Nations has recognized the specific challenges facing small island development states in particular, the greater risk of marginalization because of their small size, remoteness from large markets, high economic vulnerability to economic and natural shocks beyond their domestic control. And so today in this segment, we are going to be speaking with STEWART Sarkozy Banoczy. I think it sounds very, very, very musical.
You can say it with the French accent too.
And he is the founder and director of Precovery Labs and director of the Island Resilience Initiative of the Global Island Partnerships. I'm very excited that he could join us. So welcome, Stuart. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm doing very well. Good to talk to you.
Thanks so much for taking time to speak with me today and to have us talk a little about smart islands. Now, I must say I've been hearing a lot about smart cities for many years.
Yep.
And that normally means a city or space with using ICT, that's information communication technologies, to increase efficiency, share information with the public, and ensure quality of government services and citizen welfare. So when I hear smart islands, I am thinking it's the same thing. Is it or isn't it? What's your take on it? How would you define a smart island?
So I definitely have the same experience as you, where smart cities, and having done city work as well as island work and rural work, smart cities are something that comes up a lot in my other work when it comes to trying to create resilience in cities. And I see smart cities as something that's supportive of resilience, it's supportive of sustainability. So for islands, because in some cases you can really control everything in kind of one particular way, it is also reinforcing for the idea of a broader resilience. And because we identify island resilience as something that really allows you to continue to use traditional knowledge and modern techniques and infrastructure and avoiding and rebuilding after shocks and stresses, but probably more importantly, being resilient to those shocks and stresses and having this precovery mindset to have this way of working that as long as the ICT, as long as the smart in data and information and technology supports resilience and isn't something that makes it more vulnerable, then I see smart islands as being something that's very reinforcing for the idea of resilience, the idea of island resilience being something that's more holistic. So it follows smart cities, but unlike smart cities where it might be an isolated city or it might be a region that the cities are connected to, we know that in many locations, island resilience can be something that encompasses the entire island and out into areas of the ocean where they have to worry about the kinds of technology that might support that island in being better prepared for a disaster or working on shipping issues and things like that.
Let me ask you a question, because you said something very interesting. You said traditional knowledge.
Yeah.
And I kind of picked up on that as part of the conversation that needs to be had to create resilience. How are you finding, let's say, people who are, let's say, the keepers of this traditional knowledge, sharing the space with the traditional, let's say, development experts, and I use that word godly since I used to be one of those people, or I still am in some ways. How are we creating that space for that knowledge transfer to exist in the future as it has in the past?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think it comes in two different ways, at least for the work that I'm doing and that we've been doing at the Global Island Partnership on the Island Resilience Initiative and with this kind of Precovery mindset, because we know that in island locations and even in larger continental and developing world locations, there's indigenous knowledge, there's traditional knowledge that should be combined or captured. And some of that has been ignored or has gone away. And what we've done, and I think this is where it really changes the work that we're doing, and that is, how do we link the ability to, say, take something that was traditional indigenous knowledge and bring it together with a more modern infrastructure-based, IT-based. And we started with the definition of resilience and making sure that it wasn't something that was just the modern day version of it, that it was something that could be tribal, it could be traditional knowledge, and how those worlds were combined. But I also think that what we found is it has to be something that isn't just in the definitions or just in the framework that we've created for these kinds of projects. It's also the solutions themselves. So a good example is if in fact there are traditional sail-powered canoes from island locations that allowed people to move cargo and each other easily island to island, why aren't we using some of those old techniques in more modern vessels that are green, reduce greenhouse gas, but are sail-powered, solar-powered, and create kind of a combination of old traditions and new contemporary ways of doing this work. So it starts at the definitions and frameworks and making sure that traditional knowledge and indigenous people are brought into it. And then it's also making sure that in those co-benefits and resilience dividends, that we're making sure that the solutions have this combination that really makes sense, that bring the old and the new together.
So how does the Global Island Partnership Initiative tie into the Sustainable Development Goals and 2030? I'm especially interested in issues around water management, energy management, and waste management, especially waste management, because nobody seems to be solving that problem as I see it back in the Caribbean region.
Yes. So I think in the Caribbean, as well as in the Pacific and other places, there's two ways that the Global Island Partnership really works. And it relates to the Sustainable Development Goals as well. Number one, there's high-level political leadership engagement, and that means creating partnerships at the highest levels with presidents and premiers and prime ministers and ambassadors to do the kinds of negotiations that are necessary so that islands have a voice. So that's kind of the high level, right? Then you have what I call coral up. Like, how do we start at the very basic bottom level and where people are living and what they're doing? And that's where some of these initiatives come into play, because we want to make sure that local practitioners, small villages, communities, NGOs, civil society organizations, small businesses even that local people own, that from the bottom up or from the coral up, they too are having an influence. And one of the ways that we're doing this right now specifically is that the Island Resilience Initiative is in fact a project where we're taking the Sustainable Development Goals and working with a set of pilot islands to get them to create a dashboard that's common amongst them that is in 6 pillars. Those 6 pillars, we're combining what those Sustainable Development Goals are, but we're also asking them, what are the most important ones? Like, you can report on all of the SDGs if you want and everything else that comes from all these global compacts. But what if we said to you, what are the top 3 for each goal, and what are the targets and indicators that are the most relevant to your location? And we combine them into these 6 pillars. So we're literally working with a set of Sustainable Development Goals, linking these together so that we're able to say to these islands, and they're able to say to each other, here's what we care about the most, here's the work that we're trying to do, here are the solutions that best fit our highest level targets, because there's so much demand, there's so much need, and there's a difference between demand and need. And so what people really need to be able to finance, what people really need to find for solutions that we can potentially help scale across islands in the Caribbean, across islands in the Pacific, that becomes more important in the way that we align to the Sustainable Development Goals, or the Paris Climate Agreement, or Samoa Pathway, or the Sendai Framework. There are a lot of global compacts.
I know, very many. And this is the problem. I think in many instances,
Yep.
we have NGOs that are operating at one level, and they might know all these terms, but the average, as I call it, the average man in the street, or in Jamaican terms, the average bag juice man doesn't know what the hell you are talking about.
Yep.
Therefore, what does 2030 mean to them? And so one of my challenges as a futurist and a sustainability engineer, thinking about the concept of smart islands, and especially because islands are important to me personally, is how do we create this bridge between, let's say, what organizations like yourself are doing, and how you're thinking about the future, and how the average person on the street thinks about the future. So in doing some of your work, how are you including, let's say, a futures construct as part of the way in which you have these conversations and looking at the interventions that need to happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one of the best examples we've seen is when we go out to do our workshops, we make sure that we work with the local NGOs and in some cases, other islands within an island chain to bring in the villagers, the leaders, the mayors of these very small places. And that we also bring together the CSOs and the NGOs who are representing groups of specialized individuals, whether it's gender related, or other ethnic groups, or whatever it happens to be that represents a broader voice. So it's all about the stakeholder gathering. And I think in some ways, this is a checkbox that people use. That is not our practice. We want to be able to look out into the audience as we do our exercises, and we put people together to discuss the path to the future, and know that there is a ministry person, mid-level, low-level, plus an NGO, plus an individual citizen, maybe a mayor from a small village, all working together as they think about what these solutions and what the path is forward. What's our voyage together, or sail plan, as we call it, within the Island Resilience Initiative. So how do we bring that average person, the regular person on the street, along? And we've seen that work really well in these various workshops we've been doing. Where it's most successful is where that island or island nation or territory or state or province or whatever they are have already done some groundwork. So we're amazed to see on Majuro Atoll in the Marshall Islands back in March that they had Sustainable Development Goal banners in front of the schools as you went by them, and they had posters and banners inside the schools on the walls, so that children, everyday children, were seeing.
That's definitely a whole different level of engagement. I mean, Jamaica has had its vision statement, Vision 2030 statement, that far predates the SDGs, and I have been challenged at getting support to have what I call people conversations about their lives in 2030, not the government's plan for 2030, a very different construct. And most of the agencies I've been speaking don't seem to kind of get the message I'm trying to make. On another note, though, I want to talk to you about the resilience and economics, because one of the big challenges we are having is, as you say, how do we create the economics that can help to create resilience? If people are poor and desperate, they tend to behave in ways which are eventually challenging to their own well-being because they're desperate. So as you're looking at this island partnership, are you having any work that focuses on rethinking the metrics around sustainability for islands? Because, for example, I know that in the development space, people always say, well, it's very expensive to work in these islands because, you know, it's very expensive to travel there and it's expensive to stay there. And then, but you can only do, let's say, you know, 100,000 worth of grants or loans. Therefore, the return on investment. How are you beginning to kind of have that conversation about new metrics that really measure what matters from the point of view of the well-being and welfare of islands?
Yeah, I think that it's a great question, and it's one that I've been doing 20 years of indigenous work, and it's a very common problem with foundations and governments and large NGOs and funders, because they tend to feel like the per capita dollar amount, or the bang for the buck, as they say in the United States, isn't enough for these groups. But what I think we have found is that because islands kind of contain everything, and they shouldn't be viewed as laboratories or as petri dishes, but more in the sense that they are on the leading edge. They're on the front lines of climate change battles, of changes to things like acidification of coral reefs. There's all kinds of things around fisheries, around shipping. So in some ways, while the locations might be spread apart, hard to get to, some smaller populations, small in scale, they in fact represent this microcosm of everything that's going on in the planet. So,
right, I like to say that I certainly like to use that argument, but it's not getting anywhere. And furthermore, I find that even the politicians and the development experts on those islands continue to use, I think, metrics that do not serve them. I mean, the GDP and the GNP is a meaningless exercise for Jamaica, for example. Talking about economic growth when we have high inequality is a waste of time, because it's really not helping us to make the right decisions around, at the end of the day, resilience. People see resilience as about the environment, but it's also about the people's ability to maintain themselves and to, so unquote, reinvent themselves when a trauma happens.
That's right.
So I would love to find out, if this is not happening, how can a Smart Island initiative maybe help to begin this conversation, also take it out of just, I would say, like sensors for water, sensors for the sea or whatever, and also come up with a sensor for people. How do we censor when the temperature, before the thing happens and the riot happens, or the terrorist act happens? How do we begin to sense that people are getting, the pressure cooker is becoming too hot?
And I think that's really why, and while I use the word sustainability sometimes still, because that is an element that's important, we tend to say resilience and Precovery in a very holistic way, rather than just sustainability. And in particular, resilience that's defined by this island resilience framework that we've created, which includes legal, governmental, social and cultural, physical and natural, and economic and financial. Is the social and cultural and the citizens in the middle that are surrounded by those four quadrants that I just described are the way we look at island resilience. So that means it is not just about disaster preparedness, nor is it just about physical infrastructure, nor is it about tech, as smart, as we're talking about in this case. It's about this holistic view of how people's lifestyles, people's life ways, and I hesitate to say that, like, you could have social cultural infrastructure, but if we have to use words that developers and others use, then let's do so, because that's where the traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge comes in here as well, is that in order to be fully resilient, you have to encompass health, education, economics, welfare in ways that socially and culturally we don't normally talk about. And we definitely don't talk about it in urban settings, but there's starting to be this shift where urban meets islands, islands meet coastal, and then you have the ocean and its well-being, that if that goes, especially in places where, we were just in St. Martin, 80% of the GDP, as they call it, is on tourism. What happens when tourism goes? 10% of the world's GDP, as it's counted, is also tourism. Sustainable tourism helps to shift that and the resilience that comes with it, because like many of the places that we work, if you're only doing the one, there are no resilience dividends or co-benefits to the work that we've been trying to do. You end up simply talking about the physical infrastructure or the tsunami sensors or whatever it is that, as you were saying. What we're trying to do is be sure that we're creating a more holistic view of what resilience means. And that means the people are in the middle, the social, cultural, the physical, natural, environmental, government and legal, because if the governance is better and the zoning is more equitable, then you are creating, even if you are creating physical structures, you're creating them in a way that includes people, so that when a disaster strikes, because sometimes it's going to, it's not worse. And it's also not worse for people who are already being pressed down by the economic situation that they're in. Because it's quite often the case that those that are affected more adversely are those that are poor or that are in this condition that we're not able to take care of ahead of time. So that's a very difficult situation for us to sort of overcome when that is happening.
So can I ask you to help me probably define SMART then? Because typically when we're looking at SMART projects, you talk about sustainable or strategic. So what is the S for you? Is it sustainable, strategic? What is the M? Is it meaningful or is it measurable? What is the A? Is it agility or adaptability, or is it aspirational? What is the R? Is it like resilience, or what is the T? Is it tactical or transformative? Because I think if we're going to start using this term, smart islands, and really use it in a way that's going to convey the story of the future we want for 2030 and beyond, we have to be very clear that we're not defining SMART the way that we would define it elsewhere, and we begin to really unpack the term and redefine. So, maybe, if not today, but at some point you'll help me figure out how we would define smart islands. Because the fact is that it says that social change requires 10% of a population to have the same worldview, right? To reach a tipping point. So whether we're talking about the Caribbean islands or the Pacific islands, and the social cultural mores and means of these spaces are very different because they're very different histories, right? Yep. So the question is, it's probably going to be easier for the Pacific Islands to coalesce around something than the Caribbean region that was already having, between national divisions and language divisions and colonial power divisions and racial divisions, and it's a lot. So we're going to have to do a lot to make sure that when we're talking about this thing in which we want islands to move towards smart, that we're using smart in the same way. So I give you some time to think about it. So what's your S, what's your M, what's your A, what's your R, what's your T?
It's interesting because we talk about creating strategic plans that have SMART goals, and the SMART actually stands for something, right? Measurable, achievable, etc., right? And that's not how I think of the SMART for smart islands. And generally, smart cities and smart islands, the way that the majority of people who I'm going to see this weekend and next week at the Smart Island World Congress, they're thinking data, tech, ICT, information flow, right? They're thinking of it from that sense. And as a representative of a certain city, high-level city, said to me the other day, I'm all for smart cities and smart islands as long as it's not just being smart or technology-driven for the sake of being smart or technology-driven, that in fact, there's a reason we're doing it, there's a value that's added, that it reinforces some other level of resilience and a way of living and being. So for me, the SMART isn't necessarily defined individually. It is being sure that if we're going to develop technology and we're going to manage data, however it comes into the system, if we're going to talk about information sharing, that all of those things aren't done in isolation, or they're not just done because it's a cool piece of technology. We hear that and see that a lot, right? Something that's like the latest way of doing X to prevent Y becomes very, very popular. The view that that particular person and that I share is those things have to have a value that goes beyond what it is that's being created, right? Whatever that sensor is, whatever that new piece of equipment or interesting innovation is, it has to have dividends. It has to have reinforcement and co-benefits that help the entire island or that population in a way that's more holistic and not so silo-driven. So for me, SMART is defined as something that is either technological or information or data-driven, but that reinforces a larger resilience view on that island or in that city or in that village or wherever it might be, because SMART on its own doesn't get us all the way there. We need it to be integrated. We need it to be holistic.
So I'm going to try something before we draw to a close. Here's what I'm going to try. I'm going to now say, for me, because I'm trying to define it, I'm going to say systems that are sustainable for the S, meaningful metrics, aspirational adaptability, are resilience, and tactical technology. So that's my current working definition. So tell me, as we draw to a close, 2030, right? Because that's the year that fascinates all of us right now.
Yes.
Can you see into the future and tell me what will be a headline? You're doing all this work, you're flying from here to there, going all the way to the Pacific is like a 17, 20-hour trip, wear and tear on your body. What is going to be different? How will 2030 emerge? And give me one successful headline that will exist because of the work that you're doing in Island Resilience Initiative as part of the Global Island Partnership.
I hope that there's at least two headlines that come into play. One is that plastics are no longer the scourge that they are in island locations, coastlines, and in oceans, because we've developed something else to prevent their use, but also to get them out of the system. So that's one area where I think we can make advances. I think the other is in the areas of energy and transportation, there has to be an energy and transportation, and this gets back to your SMART definition, right? If energy and transportation aren't fixed and it's not done through a way that doesn't hurt the islands more, that doesn't create more waste, wind, solar, or whatever it might be, I think those would be, for me, those would be the two big headlines, that by 2030, we've solved this whole plastic and sort of waste problem, because it's just going to get worse, and the islands it's piling up, eh? And then on the other hand, it's the energy and shipping and transportation piece, because those two things actually work hand in hand, although people don't necessarily think solar plus plastic. Yes. The thing is if you solve those hand in hand, you would reduce in so many different ways that are interrelated.
Yeah, that's a very good thing to say, and that's one thing that sort of drives me bananas. So are we going to choose today to be optimistic, pessimistic, or my word of choice is neutralistic?
Well, you know what? I call myself a precoverist, so I am going to be hopeful. I'm going to be optimistic. Yes. Because I think if we focus on resilience and precovery and we all become precoverists rather than constantly being in recovery, we're going to get further.
Yes, I would agree.
For Jamaica and for everywhere else in the Caribbean, but also many other places as well.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Stewart Sarkozy Banoczzy, for joining us. That's his folks. We have been speaking to him. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're very, very welcome. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah, we are grateful that you have spent some time listening to us on the Future Sense Now, where we explore salient ideas for sustainable futures. We have come to the end of a great conversation, but this story actually is being written by all of us. Creating the future we want is our shared responsibility. Remember, it is better for us to act as the parent of our future than the child of our past. So seize the day, and as we say in Jamaica, walk good, safe journeys.
You have been listening to Future Sense Now with Dr. Claire Nelson, brought to you by the Futures Forum. For more, please visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Thank you for listening. Spread the word. Share the future.